You started in your own flat with the supper club?
The supper club was in the flat for 2.5 years.
Right.
And
how many people could get in?
20 squeezed in.
Yeah.
And then after getting married and for various other reasons, we thought, got a bit sick of turning the flat upside down every other week. So we moved into a nice wine shop in Shoreditch. And then just recently, now running it from a lovely sort of Scandi vibe cafe on the Holloway Road.
Wonderful.
And that's been great.
So you changed locations to suit the numbers, or you?
No, just to suit us.
Right.
I mean, it was never intentional that we'll pop up here, pop up there. That's just sort of been how it's progressed. I mean, ideally we'll stay where we are for the time being because it's perfect. It's got a good kitchen, a lovely feel, garden out the back for when the weather's nice. And they make amazing coffee, so I don't have to worry about that. That was the sort of worst part of the evening for me, was just about finished, probably had more wine than should have done, then had to go around, take everyone's coffee and tea orders and do all the truffles, and now they do the coffee and I don't have to worry about it.
It works perfectly.
Yeah.
It's always difficult when you have if we may call it a pop-up occasion, it's always difficult garnering the money at the end of the evening, or do you get it beforehand?
No, I feel quite strongly about that because every now and then, or more often than I'd like, there are last-minute dropouts,
right,
or very occasionally people who just don't pay. Actually, last night we were a bit short, but anyway. And people have often said, well, you should charge in advance, but the whole point of a supper club is it's informal, it's not a restaurant. And at a restaurant, you don't even pay in advance. So the idea of saying, come to my little home and I'll feed you, and then, but here's my bank details. I never wanted to do that. So there's a little pot, and when people leave, they put their donation in it.
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
That's a very nice way of doing it. Well, it's not terribly commercial, but it's a nice way of doing it.
No, but it's not. I mean, I wouldn't do it if it wasn't an extra bit of pocket money, but I'm not doing it for the commercial, as a commercial venture.
It's all about the food and the company, and how do you get your guests? I mean, where do you find them?
That's a good question. It's a sort of combination of all your favourite websites, Twitter, Facebook, and through the blog a bit, and then through, I suppose when we first started it, that was just when the sort of London supper club scene as a whole was really taking off. So we got quite a lot of press. So through that, people would email. And I now have a mailing list of maybe 800 people, and there are 1,200 people in the Facebook group, and then there's Twitter, and then there's now the customers at the coffee shop, so they come from all over, really. And of all ages. That's the wonderful thing about it. I'll have, someone there with their 16-year-old kids, and there'll be, a couple of grandparents in the other corner, and I love that. I never want the food to be too show-offy, and occasionally I do veer into the territory of trying to do something that I'm not about because I've read a recipe somewhere or I've seen something on the telly and I think, oh, how cool. So it's just really about lots of delicious food and people being able to bring their own wine and have a lovely time and catch up with their friends, hopefully meet some new people, and from my perspective, hopefully sell a book or two. But that's a sort of nice add-on as opposed to a central raison d'etre.
How do you get your inspiration?
Good question. Because it's quite hard to get, again, stuck in a rut of cooking stuff for the supper club. Because I guess I'm quite dictated, or restricted rather, by numbers. So I can't, for example, I couldn't ever do a steak and chips night, even if I wanted to, which I wouldn't. But because you can't do that for 20 people, really, serving everyone at once. And obviously restricted by costs, because if I start splashing out on fillets and this, that and the other, then there's going to be no profit. So inspiration, I guess, I love reading cookbooks as a sort of pleasure as opposed to cook directly from. And I suppose just by working food, you spend your life either going to restaurants and eating interesting things, talking to people about interesting dishes, occasionally catching a television programme, in that you sort of pluck a bit of fruit from every tree in the garden. Yeah.
Do you have a chef which has stood out in your mind that you respect or admire?
I quite like the sort of old school, I have to say, just the sort of Jeremy Lee, Simon Hopkinson, Fergus Henson approach to just simplicity and good ingredients. I'm fascinated by the new trend of sort of this modern American trend, not all the burger nonsense, but the sort of, the Dave Chang and the Edward Lees, and who are doing great stuff, and not the sort of stuff that I necessarily cook.
Sure.
But I find that sort of disregard for this sort of nebulous idea of authenticity and actually just cooking delicious food, and whether it's like Korean stroke Alabama stroke whatever food, but the final product is delicious, then that's what excites me. And seeing people go, wow, this is bizarre.
This is, but different and good.
We did a smoked buttermilk ice cream with these sort of bourbon caramel apples a couple of months ago, and it was just, I think, one of the favourite things I've cooked.
Interesting. Korean food you mentioned then. Is it the next big thing? It's very big in America at the moment. Is it going to be the next big thing?
I think it might be. There's somewhere just opening at the moment in Shoreditch called Juba, and somewhere else has just opened in Fitzrovia, whose name escapes me. But yeah, it's, who knows. I do actually a weekly trend slot on Radio 1 on Sunday morning for 2 minutes, talk about the latest food trend, but I'm always slightly reluctant to say, yeah, that's going to be the next big trend, because who knows. But Korean food certainly seems to be going places, and it's a great cuisine.
Yeah, and family oriented as well. Sharing dishes. And
Which, as you know, has been sort of any new restaurant in London seems to have sharing dish, even if it makes no sense whatsoever to, which gets a bit frustrating, but it makes perfect sense with Korean and a lot of Asian food.
James, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you for having me. It's been a
nice
pleasure.
to talk with you.
Yeah, you too.